Hey everybody, welcome back to the next part in my dialing in series for our Line 6 Helix, and continuing on again with our firmware 3.1 series, I'm going to take a look at what I feel may just be one of the top favorite new features added in firmware 3.1, and that is the dynamic hall reverb. So many folks, it's this online thing where, you know, the Helix has always been known for having these terrible, we'll call them terrible reverbs. I've done videos on in the past. I really don't think the reverbs in the Helix were ever as bad as a lot of folks made them out to be. Maybe not as tweakable as some would like. I've done videos on how you could actually take the existing reverbs and make them a little more tweakable by putting them in a split path and adding other effects to them. But boy, would it be nice to have a reverb that is very tweakable in that way. And the folks at Line 6 have done a really wonderful job in adding a lot of the new reverbs in the past, the Ganymede and, you know, whatever the other ones are off the top of my head, I can't think of them. But the dynamic hall reverb, along with the hot springs, which I also have a video that I've either put out or is coming out. I don't know how I'm going to be releasing them when the time comes, but the dynamic hall, I think, is going to satisfy a lot of users who want that big, lush reverb with just a lot of control over how we want that reverb to sit and sound, whether, you know, in a mix or playing solo. It just sounds beautiful. So the folks at Line 6 have really knocked it out of the park with this one. So without further ado, let's go over to HX Edit and take a look and see what we have. So here we have the dynamic hall reverb. I just basically threw in a US Princess amp, set it up for a nice clean sound. Sounds like this. And that's that, so just nice and dry. Now, if I turn this reverb on, let's take a look at the parameters we have first. So what we have is decay, pre-delay, very typical in a reverb. Interesting here, we have room size, we have control over diffusion, damping, mix, motion, that's gonna be a really interesting one. Low frequency setting in hertz, and then the low gain to control that setting. Low cut, high cut, and the output level and the trails control like a lot of others. So decay is pretty self-explanatory like I've talked about in a lot of my other reverb videos. It's just gonna be how long that reverb tail trails on for and decays for. So the nice thing in the dynamic delay is we have everywhere from 0.1 seconds all the way up to 10 seconds of decay. Really nice stuff. Pre-delay, again, nothing really specific to the dynamic delay here. This is in most of our delays, and it's going to be how long before the onset of that first reflection or before we start hearing the reverb. So, you know, a lot of folks say, well, what do I need pre-delay for? Well, sometimes if you have a big lush reverb, it can kind of engulf our initial, you know, attack or tone. So, you know, by setting a higher pre-delay, it allows us to maybe play a sound and then have the delay kind of come in so many milliseconds later. So it can help to give a little more clarity in our sounds. Now, room size is really interesting. It gives us a room size of 10 meters, 20 meters, or 30 meters. Not sure exactly how they're measuring that all out, but it does make a very tweakable reverb, and each setting has its own unique characteristics, which we'll take a look at. Diffusion, another nice feature we have, which is basically going to control the density of the reflections bouncing off the walls. We'll talk about how that works in a minute. Damping is going to be just how much of the high-end energy of the reverb is absorbed in the room. And basically it'll sound like it just darkens the reverb up as we move it down. Mix obviously is going to be our dry signal to our wet signal. Motion control is really interesting and a very powerful feature in this, and really where I think this gets its name from the dynamic hall, because there's not going to be this static sound to it. When we have the motion set low, there seems like there's no movement to the reflections, but I guess the best way I could describe it, I don't know if I'm describing it correctly, as we put the motion up, it sounds like the reflections are in constant movement. It gives a beautiful, lush, and dynamic sound to this, and we'll give some demonstrations of that in a second. The low frequency seems to be a shelf EQ. I don't have anything that has told me that for certain other than my ears, but it seems we can set that and then control the low end by either boosting or cutting it. And low and high cuts just going to basically roll off the certain frequencies above or below what we have them set to for our reverb, whether we want less bottom or cut off and control some of the high end. So let's take a listen to how this sounds. Let's start off with just like a moderate pre-delay around 50 milliseconds, a decay of around 4.5, and we'll bring our mix down to around 40%. We'll hear what that sounds like. So we can already hear it's very nice and lush. Now let's take a listen to the decay. I'm gonna bring the mix all the way up to 100 so we can really hear what these parameters are doing. So all the way up to 10 seconds on the decay. So no shortage of decay length. If we bring it all the way down, get almost nothing. Now, we'll bring this back up and you'll hear with the pre-delay what I was talking about when I have the mix on 100%. If I have the pre-delay down to 0, the reverb comes in right as I pick. If I put up to 200 milliseconds, you'll hear a slight delay before the onset of the reverb. You'll see as I pick, 200 milliseconds later, the reverb comes in. Now room size, let's take a listen. I'm gonna set the decay to 10, and I'm gonna bring the pre-delay down to 0. Let's go to 10 meter room. Shall bring the decay down a little bit. So to me, the 10 meter room has a much more dense sound to it, and it seems like the 30 meters is a little bigger with more clarity. That would kind of make sense since in a bigger room, those reflections probably wouldn't start interacting with each other maybe right away. That's my guess on it, whereas in a smaller room they would. All right, the diffusion now, like I said, is kind of the density of these early reflections off the walls. Now, what you're gonna find is, if I put this up here, we'll keep this set the way it is. At low diffusion settings, on a percussive sound, you're almost gonna hear a little bit of a chattery sound. It's not going to be as smooth a reverb as when we have the diffusion up to full. Do you hear that initial attack? It doesn't have that chattery sound anymore. It's very smooth and lush and maybe a little more dense. So I would say with diffusion, for a percussive sound, I would probably go with a higher diffusion and maybe something that sits in a mix, maybe go with a little lower because it's going to maybe not be quite so dense. So that's how I would kind of approach the diffusion. Damping is just going to be how much of that high energy part of the reverb of the reflections is absorbed. So if we are up at 20 kilohertz, as we bring that all the way down, it dampens that high energy, or that high energy is absorbed. So we can already see how incredibly flexible this reverb is and so many options. It could seem a little overwhelming at first, but once we understand them, I think it's a very, very useful reverb that we can get a lot of great sounds out of. Now, let's just get something going here. I'm gonna bring this back up to 10 seconds, and I wanna bring this motion in. Right now I have the motion on 0. Kind of a static decay. It doesn't sound like there's any movement in it. I can bring that motion to 10. Sounds now like the reflections are moving in the room. Now, as with any of these types of parameters, you know, a little can go a long way, and it might be a little bit tempting in the beginning to just crank it up and go, oh, listen to that cool sound. But, you know, sometimes a little is enough to just get that motion going. And as with a lot of these parameters, we don't have to go overboard and kind of use it as, you know, the first day with the new toy type of thing. So the low frequency, like I said, if I crank this up to 500 hertz, and you'll hear, I'm going to bring that motion back down a bit, you'll hear that. Basically dialed all the low end out of it. So it seems like a shelf EQ at whatever setting we put it at. It's going to dial out a lot of that low end on our reverb tail. So if we find it's very dense, but we like all the other settings, we could use that. And again, low and high cut, similar. Again, I've rolled out all of the low end on that, the highs as well. I've dulled the reverb up with a high cut. So let's bring that up around, I don't know, 7.5. We'll keep this one down around 125. So now that we understand how that works, some of my favorite settings on this might be something, and it, you know, really, again, it's a hard thing for me to say what my favorite settings would be because it really depends on what I'm using it for. Am I playing by myself where I just want it to be this huge lush sound with some beautiful slow swelling chords, or do I want it something that sits in a mix? You know, it really depends, but we're going to be able to do all of it with this. So if I just wanted a nice sort of generic setting, I might take something with a pre-delay of 20 milliseconds, maybe a decay of 3.5 seconds, stick on the 30 meter room, maybe smooth out the diffusion a little bit here, 40, damping, I'll keep around there. Mix, I'm gonna bring down around 40% to start. I'm gonna bring maybe that motion in about halfway. Not gonna worry about cutting out the low frequency, and I'll keep the low and high cut where I had it. We'll see how this sounds. Really nice stuff. If I want to go bigger on that, I could bring the decay up, maybe even the mix up 50%. Let's add a little more of that motion in there. And bring the high cut up a bit. Even come down on the diffusion. So really beautiful stuff from the folks at Line 6 again. So I hope that helped to kind of break down what some of these parameters are doing and help you to be able to dial this in a lot quicker now that you have an understanding of what you're going to get out of each parameter instead of just kind of sliding things around. Because some of them are going to be very interactive with one another. You know, something like the low frequency and the low cut, you might go, oh, which one should I use? Now, hopefully you'll have a bit of a better understanding of that. And some of them will kind of accomplish similar things. I think the real takeaway here is the room size, motion controls, and the damping, really invaluable. And the fact we can get such a nice long decay if we wanted it. Or like I said too, we could use this just as a much smaller kind of a reverb as well. We don't have to use it for those huge lush tones. So really useful stuff here. So we could think of this as just being for those big lush tones, but by making the right settings on it, we can dial in a lot of real vastly useful but different reverbs. So again, I hope that was helpful, guys. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it, and please subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out. I'll be back really soon with some more content. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and ciao for now.